How you doing? I'm Big D. Welcome to the show. I do appreciate you spending probably about a good half hour with me today. This is very important. I think you ought to listen to the very end. And if you like what you see, please subscribe. I'm trying to build the show, and if we get to the point where we're happy with the show, we'll continue. And I think what you're gonna hear today, you're gonna like. So you already know about this week that the United States invaded Venezuela, capturing former President Nicolas Maduro, and announced plans to run the country until further notice. But what you might not know is why and the actual impact it will have on you. They will tell you that this is only about the drugs. I don't think it is. This is a story about power, commodities, and the future of the entire global monetary system. Oil, silver, gold. It's probably any of the commodities that this country lives on is going to be a part of this. And the future of the entire global monetary system. After decades of debt fueled paper promises, the future is being shaped by what's real and tangible: oil, gold, silver, rare earth elements, raw materials that power modern economies and warfare. The future is commodities. And Venezuela is one of the most resourceful countries in the world with deep ties to China and Russia. That directly challenges the petrodollar system and set the stage for the consequences for the dollar, your gold, and the future of global monetary system. But before we can break down how these moves might accelerate de-dollarization and shape the world's order, we first have to understand why Venezuela resources are so important to the United States. And don't skip this foundational part as it sets the stage for what's coming next. Again, this is not about drugs, in my opinion. It's about the commodities. The petrodollar, the future of your gold and silver, and of course the dollar in your wallet. The United States is currently the world's largest oil producer. But not all oil is created equal. In fact, there's a huge spectrum of types of crude, ranging from heavy and thick, goo like crude oil, maybe consistent to tar, to the lighter and thinner. Now, the lighter and thinner is typically preferred because it produces a product like gas and diesel, and whatever heavy crude oil requires far more processing, and on its face produces lower value because of the excessive amount of processing that it takes, like asphalt. But the United States produces primarily the lighter, thinner oil, which sounds like a great thing. That's the oil that everyone wants, but not so fast. Let's go back to the energy crisis in the 1970s when fear and panic around the oil scarcity was at an all-time high. During this period of time, it was widely believed that the United States production of this lighter, thinner oil was in a long-term decline, and that the heavier crude oil was going to be far more abundant in the future. Fearing a future where the light oil ran out, and the United States made massive decades long investments into recalibrating the refineries to process the heavier crude oil. Now we're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars to create refineries that process oil that wasn't even produced here in the United States. But guess what? Light oil didn't run out. In fact, there are abundance of light oil here in the United States that we can't use. And before you say, well, why don't they? Oil, U.S. oil, dependency on heavy crude. just switched everything back to the process, the light oil, to light oil, I would it would cost hundreds of billions of dollars, that decades they would lose tons of profits in the meantime. So economically and politically, it's become a bit of a non-starter, which left the U.S. with only one option: to import heavy crude. If you look at the breakdown of oil imports to the U.S. since 1970s, you can see that heavy crude oil has surged from roughly 10% of the total imports in 1978 to nearly 70% today. Let's put it a little bit simpler. The U.S. needs heavy crude oil, and it needs it in higher and higher volumes. But here's the kicker. Contrary to the 1970s beliefs, heavy oil is not so abundant. It's capital intensive, difficult to extract, and located only in a few places, with the top two locations being Canada and Venezuela. Now, at one point, Venezuela was the world's largest oil exporter, but much has changed. Years of U.S. sanctions, economic ruin, and corruption halted the industry. Without new investments, infrastructure began to decay. And as I've mentioned, crude oil is resource issue. Without the investment, equipment went by the wayside. There was no new technology, and essentially products stalled. But that wasn't just bad news for Venezuela. As I'm sure you guessed it, this was bad for the United States as well. Venezuela's production has declined and has had to become increasingly dependent on Canada, which now accounts for 60% of the United States heavy crude oil imports. If the United States was going to look to diversify or find another importer of the heavy crude oil and Venezuela's out, well, guess what? They don't have that many options to turn to. The next best in line would be Russia. In fact, President Trump is in recent interview basically said as much. Go and spend billions of dollars, fix the badly broken infrastructure, the oil infrastructure, and start making money for the country. That's why Venezuela oil matters more than ever. But this isn't just about oil. At the start of the video, I said that there was a story about power control and the future of the global monetary system. Since the 1970s, most of all oil has been priced and sold with US dollars, an agreement commonly referred to as a petrodollar. When people say that the dollar is backed by oil, this is what they're referring to. This arrangement has essentially created an infinite demand of US dollar and US debt, and kept the dollar at the center of the global financial system. But in recent years, this structure has started to crumble. In 2022, following Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the freezing of the US reserve assets, the entire world started to wake up to the fact that if US assets could be frozen or seized with the push of a button, then there weren't really sovereign. Now we are not really sovereign. This lit a fuse on de-dollarization, or an effort globally to reduce the use of and the reliance on dollar, as well as the Western dominant payment structure, instead opting for alternative payment rails, new systems, trade, local currencies, settlement in gold. Now, it's impossible to overstate just how important the petrodollar is to the United States' success, which is why the U.S. will do anything to protect it, and why other nations who are pursuing de-dollarization are experimenting with selling oil in an alternative currency and assets as well. Venezuela cut out from the U.S. dollar system years ago and became part of this shift of de-dollarizing the U.S. currency. Now, joining the collapse of the Venezuelan oil industry ranks of Russia, China, Saudi Arabia, who have already been laying the groundwork for an alternative parallel monetary system, one without the dollar. Now, the legacy media, they're not going to explain this to you. No mainstream media is going to tell you any of this. The mainstream outlet is going to tell you that the impact this will have on you, but if you're watching this video, there's a good chance that you're already understanding just how high stakes this is. As all of this continues to move forward, we can expect to see declining demand for U.S. debt. The declining demand will create more instability, and the U.S. will be forced to print more dollars to cover our deficit. But history shows us what happens when we reach this point in the currency reset. When confidence collapses, that's when you can expect to see inflation really take hold, giving way to hyperinflation and rapid price increases, and eventually an official revaluation and devaluation of the currency. In fact, Venezuela is a textbook example. After years of hyperinflation and multiple currencies and currency reevaluations, we call it flipping the zeros in this case. Imagine you had $1 million in your bank account, and one day the government tells you, we're going to lop off 3 zeros. Now you go to your bank account and you only have $1,000. That's what happens 3 times to the citizens. They learned the hard way that if they saved their wealth in the fiat currency, well, they were left with nothing. But those who protected the petrodollar under the attack, their wealth outside of the system with physical gold and silver, everyone who had the real deal physical gold, they saw that their wealth not only be protected, but actually skyrocketed on the other side compared to the falling fiat currency, giving them opportunity on the other side of the reset, which brings us back to today and to gold. Now, Venezuela's gold has already been locked in a geopolitical battle. Some of the billions locked into the the Bank of England to have refused to give them their gold back. Some are speculating that maybe this was all a master plan between England and the United States, knowing that the U.S. was going to invade and that the United States now has their sights set on the getting Venezuela's gold. I can't confirm or deny, but just looks a little suspicious. One thing that this does prove that, though, is just how important it is to make sure you have your physical gold and your silver, in my opinion. I think silver is more important. One, it's more affordable. Now, if you don't hold it, you don't own it. Venezuela learned that the hard way as well. But besides the billions that are stuck in the Bank of England, Venezuela also actually has the largest gold reserve in all of Latin America. I don't know if the United States is going to try and seize this gold, but we've made it very clear that we're at the very least going after the oil. That's definitely in their plan. That's not just my opinion. It's a lot of what has been speculated and talked about. So it's not too crazy to think that gold might be next. But either way, it's a win for the United States. Whether or not we seize the gold because you're effectively cutting Venezuela off from the other BRICS nations, that are actively building a parallel monetary system that is a gold based, that is definitely gold based. Now you're going to keep Venezuela into the dollar dominated system, right? Keeping them sticking to the script versus veering off. See, China is not just stockpiling gold. I've talked about this before, but if you're new to the channel, then I suggest you subscribe. I call it the great gold reset. China is stockpiling gold, but they are also actively creating the infrastructure to create this new gold based system. They're not waiting for the currency or the current fiat system to collapse. And then they have something ready to go. They are creating the system as it stands today, creating Shanghai Gold Exchange and increasing physical gold instead of paper gold. They have the gold corridor with vaults of across Asia, as well as creating the demand for gold by the Belt and Road Initiative, which allows settlements in, guess what? Gold. Let me ask you, can you guess who was a major participant in the Belt Road Initiative? Who owned China hundreds of billion or owed China hundreds of billions of dollars? Who was essentially in China's pocket for all of the new infrastructure? If you guessed Venezuela, you guessed correct. In fact, China was Venezuela's largest buyer of oil. Prod dollar coming back to mind, maybe. I don't know about you, but I find a coincidence these days, two coincidences, to be very rare. So I do think it's odd that a few hours before the U.S. captured Maduro, he was meeting with China's special representative on Latin American affairs. We have to remember Venezuela, not just strategically important to the United States. Venezuela is strategically important to China and the BRICS nations. Not just the crude oil, but for everything else they have sitting underground. All of other minerals, critical minerals, and rare earth elements that Venezuela has, the same ones that are going to be huge importance for the future of the modern technology and warfare. The same ones that China is trying to create a monopoly for refining and processing. But not only that, if we want to take it even a step further, allowing China or Russia to gain a foothold in Venezuela brings them really close into the Western Hemisphere. Not just monetarily, but military as well. There's a lot more than meets the eye on this story. But here's the part that matters, the most important, and how it impacts you. Because whether you agree with this intervention or not, which I'm not here to tell you how to feel, you can make the decision on your own. There is one thing we should all agree on, which is that the consequences of this do not just stay in Venezuela. They impact each and every one of us. Energy prices, your purchasing power, geopolitical dynamics, inflation, the price of gold and silver. This is a lot that is set to change from this point. Let's start with the first thing. The world has been moving towards de-dollarization for years. It is like a snowball rolling down the hill. It's only gaining speed and will continue to do so, especially after 2022. With the freezing of Russia's U.S. assets, it was like pouring gasoline on fire. And to be honest, anytime there is a massive geopolitical shock like this, all it does is wake up all of the other nations and reminds them why they are fighting for a parallel system that cuts out the dollar in the first place. The takeaway here for the BRICS nation is not to hang up their hats and call it a day, but to work harder and faster on a parallel monetary system. The one that they are already building, and we've known this for many years, multiple years, I think all the way back to 2008. So they can have a gold-based system and reduce reliance on the dollar. Now, a reduction in reliance on the dollar means less demand for U.S. debt. The less demand on U.S. debt means that we can expect to see our purchasing power decline. This is because the yield will go up. We're going to have a pay investor more to take our debt, which is going to cost us more, which means we have to print more. And you cannot create more units of an existing currency without reducing the value of the existing units, right? So that means your savings, your retirement, your paycheck, anything that is dollar dominated within the system is effectively going to be worth less. This is why gold and silver matters so much, and why I always talk about owning in your hand, in your possession, in your safe, wherever you're going to have it. Just make sure it's safe and probably insured. Now, every currency throughout history, it always comes back to gold. If you want to learn more about currency resets, the pattern they follow, the timeline, how different assets perform. I have talked about multiple videos in the past. I'm only on YouTube for a short time, but in my past, I was on Rumble. I was also on YouTube in a previous channel. Those are no longer. So if you want to stick around and check out what I have to say on usually almost a daily situation, then please subscribe. So what you must do now, recommendation wise, not telling you to go out and do this, but it is a good recommendation. We could be looking at years long. This isn't a flip of the switch where suddenly the oil is just flowing tomorrow to the United States. And again, they're talking about a lot of capital. And in the meantime, this is a wake-up call to everyone, every other nation out there to keep ditching the dollar and to move into gold. I don't know if you've noticed, but there's a lot of countries stocking up on gold, stocking up on silver. And I mean a lot of countries. But if you don't think that this is going on, or to be, keep your foot on the gas for those nations, I mean, the first thing I said was, I saw the news about Venezuela. It was none of us have enough gold and silver, right? That's what my first initial thought. And then if you don't already have a strategy in place that has physical, the real deal, gold, silver in it, it might be a problem. Again, I'm not telling you to go out and buy this, but I feel more confident that I have that in my possession. I don't know. Maybe you want to leave a comment in the comment section if you have gold and silver in your possession. Not paper, fake silver, silver certificates, derivatives. I'm not a fan of that. So let me know what you think, and leave a comment in the comment section. The video wasn't as long as I expected. So what do you think? You gotta let me know what you think. Do you like coming, spending some time with me? I hope you do. I'm going to be bringing more and more details. I do a lot of research. It might take me 2-3 days. That's why this is longer than was about a week ago when they grabbed the president out of Venezuela. So it took me a little bit, but this is what I come up with. And let me know what you think. If it's something that I've stuck on, and maybe it's what you might believe as well. Try to have a great rest of your day, and God bless.